The old success rules are not merely outdated, they are dead code. And if you are still living by them, it is not surprising that you feel tired, confused, underpaid, and strangely behind, even after doing almost everything right. That is the part nobody wants to say clearly. You worked hard, you stayed loyal, you got educated, you played it safe, you saved money, you tried to follow your passion, you aimed for stability, and somehow the result still feels smaller than it was supposed to. That is not always because you failed. Sometimes it is because you kept obeying an operating system built for a world that no longer exists. I want to be very sharp about this, because softness is expensive here. If you keep using dead code in a live market, the market does not grade your effort, it grades your fit. It does not care how noble your habits were in 1995. It does not care what your parents were told, what your teachers believed, or what your old career counselor promised. The world you are standing in now is not rewarding the same behaviors in the same way. That matters, because a lot of ordinary people are not lazy, they are just obsolete. And obsolete is more dangerous than broke, because obsolete people keep trying harder inside a machine that has already stopped paying them properly. I call this the dead code trap. The dead code trap is what happens when the rules that once turned effort into progress still live inside your head long after the economic machine that supported them has been rebuilt. You keep pressing the same buttons: more effort, more patience, more credentials, more loyalty, more caution, more savings, more waiting. But the outputs are broken because the system beneath the surface has changed. That is why you can feel responsible and still feel left behind. You are not always underworking. Sometimes you are over-obeying. That is the difference. I have spent my life studying incentives, and the biggest mistake people make is assuming that a rule is timeless simply because it once worked. A rule does not become wise because it worked inside one environment. It becomes wise only if it still matches the incentives of the current environment. Once incentives change, old virtues can become new traps. That is exactly what has happened. Hard work once worked differently because effort compounded inside a slower machine. You showed up, you learned the job, you stayed, the role matured, your knowledge deepened, promotions arrived through tenure, experience became leverage. That model made sense because the economy was less fluid, roles were more stable, and productivity gains were more likely to flow back toward the worker. But now effort often hits a ceiling before wealth begins. That is what most people still refuse to see. The average employee is living inside what I call the effort ceiling. You can answer only so many calls, complete only so many tasks, sit through only so many meetings, code only so many hours, carry only so much throughput in a system that is designed to cap your output and then capture the surplus above you. Once the ceiling is hit, more effort does not create proportionally more gain for you. It creates convenience for the company, margin for the owner, data for the platform, maybe a little praise from your manager, but not necessarily a life-changing increase in your own leverage. This is why hard work now fails so many decent people. Not because effort is worthless, because effort without scale, ownership, or distribution has been downgraded. That is the first harsh update. The only hard work that matters now is work attached to leverage, work attached to ownership, work attached to distribution, work attached to a system that can outlive the hour you personally put in. Without that, many people are just burning energy into someone else's engine. They feel proud because they are exhausted. Exhaustion is not evidence of progress. Sometimes it is evidence of misalignment. The second dead rule is loyalty. Loyalty once had market value because people were harder to replace. Knowledge was trapped inside individuals and teams. Systems were less standardized. Documentation was weaker. Software was primitive. Time inside the company made you heavier, more embedded, more expensive to lose. Long tenure built a moat. Pensions existed. Career ladders existed. Promotions often followed continuity because continuity itself had economic value. That world is largely gone. Now, much of the modern corporation is optimized for replacement, not retention. The process is documented, the tool is standardized, the knowledge is stored in software, workflows, dashboards, and tickets. The old personal moat has been paved over by systems design. That means loyalty does not necessarily increase your leverage anymore. In many environments, it decreases it. I call that the loyalty discount. The longer you stay, the more your wage often gets anchored to old assumptions, while new hires are priced to current market conditions. Your skills narrow around the internal machine. Your outside options get softer. Your identity hardens around one role, one manager, one system, one company vocabulary. You tell yourself you are building security, but in many cases you are building dependence. That is not the same thing. The modern company rarely says, "Thank you for staying." It says, "Excellent. We know your habits, your fears, your tolerance for underpricing, and how much disruption you are willing to absorb before you finally leave. That is why I tell people not to be loyal to employers in the old sentimental way. Be loyal to your trajectory. Be loyal to your compounding skill base. Be loyal to your optionality. Be loyal to your bargaining position. A company can be a platform, a school, a temporary ally, or a useful vehicle. It is not your moral parent once you understand that. You stop confusing endurance with leverage. The third dead rule is education as a guaranteed future. Education once worked as a scarcity filter. Fewer people had degrees. Even fewer had advanced credentials. The degree signaled something rare. Employers had to compete for the credentialed worker. The debt load was often tolerable relative to lifetime earnings because careers lasted long enough and pay scales remained strong enough for the investment to be rational. Now the scarcity is gone while the cost has exploded. That changes everything. I call this credential inflation. When everybody has the same signal, the signal stops distinguishing. The degree still may open doors, it still may matter. I am not romantic enough to deny that, but the old guarantee has fractured. A credential is often now a baseline filter rather than a durable moat. It gets you through the automated gate. It does not necessarily secure the future on the other side of it. Meanwhile, tuition has outrun common sense in many categories. Debt loads arrive earlier, heavier, and more punishing. And outside the formal system, marketable skills can often be learned faster, cheaper, and more directly than before. That does not make education worthless. It makes education non-magical. This is the update. Most people need learning still matters. Institutional learning no longer guarantees leverage by default. The winner now is not always the most credentialed. Often it is the most adaptive. The person who can keep learning after the diploma. The person who builds a private education system inside adult life. The person who keeps updating skills as markets move, instead of treating the degree like a lifetime passport. That is the shift. Old success meant entering a system that kept educating your economic value for you. New success means you must keep rewriting your own value manually. That is more demanding, but it is also more honest. The fourth dead rule is playing it safe and being patient. This one is extremely dangerous because it still sounds mature. It sounds like discipline. It sounds like adulthood. It sounds responsible in the older system. Patience worked because there was a schedule underneath life. Wait long enough and the bus comes. Stay long enough and the promotion arrives. Save long enough and the asset gets closer. Avoid obvious mistakes and the delayed reward eventually appears. That logic only works when the environment is scheduled. Much of modern life is not scheduled. It is unscripted. That means waiting can easily become inaction disguised as character. I call this the bus stop delusion. You keep standing in one place because old wisdom trained you to believe that patience is always a virtue. But what if there is no bus? What if the route was cut? What if the whole station is now just an abandoned sign from a previous era? What if the modern advantage goes not to the person who waited longest, but to the person who ran more intelligent experiments, gathered more feedback, and accumulated more iterations? That is what many people still fail to see. The world now often rewards attempts more than endurance. Not random frantic motion, not stupid jumping, but iteration. Small moves, small tests, fast learning action that teaches. The modern winner is often not the person with the deepest patience. It is the person who can collect the most useful attempts without blowing himself up. That is a different game. The old system said hold position. The new system says move, learn, reposition, move again. That is why many cautious people are not actually safe. They are just static. And static systems are surprisingly fragile in moving worlds. The fifth dead rule is saving money as the primary path to major asset acquisition. This offends a lot of people because it sounds so responsible. Save, wait, build the pile, buy the thing. That rule made more sense when wages inflation and asset prices moved in roughly similar rhythms. Your income grew, your savings accumulated. The house you wanted did not sprint away from you much faster than your capacity to approach it. Today, that relationship is broken in many categories. I call it the moving finish line. Wages rise slowly. Inflation keeps eating. Major assets, especially housing in many regions, reprice faster than the saver can close the distance. So the person who is doing the right thing experiences a strange humiliation. The target keeps moving away while he behaves more responsibly. He interprets that as a personal failure when often it is structural mismatch. That does not mean saving is useless. It means savings have changed jobs. Savings used to be a growth path by themselves more often. Now savings are usually first a protection layer and second an action layer protection, because 6 months of expenses can stop life from knocking you into debt. Action because liquidity lets you act when opportunity or dislocation appears. Savings are no longer enough by themselves for many people to beat major asset inflation cleanly. Over time, that is the brutal math. You still need savings, but savings now need allies, ownership, investment, cash, flowing assets, skill leverage, multiple income routes. Without those, cash often turns into a slowly weakening shield rather than a ladder. The sixth dead rule is follow your passion. This one survives because it sounds beautiful, and beauty is a wonderful disguise for bad incentives. Passion feels noble. It feels authentic. It flatters the ego because it tells you that deep internal feeling should be the primary organizing principle of your market behavior. That is not how markets work. I call this the passion trap. The problem is not passion itself. The problem is beginning with passion and assuming demand will automatically form around it. Millions of people are passionate about the same things: fitness, music, gaming, design content, fashion, storytelling, photography. Plenty of them are good, some are extraordinary. But demand does not automatically reward quality. Markets reward distribution, scarcity, timing, monetization, audience, fit, and solve pain. That is the harder truth. Passion without demand often creates beautiful isolation. You get better, you care more, you produce more, and nobody meaningful pays. That is devastating precisely because the work was sincere. The updated rule is much colder. Find demand first, then let passion catch up or attach itself to the opportunity. This sounds less romantic because it is less romantic, but it also respects reality. I would rather see you build a life around a profitable problem and grow to love the craft than spend 10 years waiting for the universe to reward your private sincerity. Markets do not pay for sincerity by default. They pay for value that travels. That is why passion must be disciplined by distribution. That is why talent must be disciplined by demand. That is why I do not trust any advice that begins with your feelings and ends with money. The line from passion to income is far less direct than people want it to be. The seventh dead rule is stability as the finish line. This may be the most seductive one of all, because stability feels like psychological relief. One paycheck, one role, one path, one rhythm. One future you can imagine clearly. Human beings love that because it reduces cognitive load. It gives the illusion that risk has been tamed. Often it has only been concentrated. I call this the stability cage. When your entire life depends on one income source, one industry assumption, one employer, one skill stack, and one version of the future continuing to function, you are not secure. You are exposed in one place, and systems with concentrated exposure do not usually fail gradually. They fail all at once. That is why stable setups can be so dangerous. They train people to optimize for preservation, not adaptation. They become excellent at maintaining the present and terrible at preparing for change. Then when layoffs come, technology shifts, margins compress, a new tool changes the work, a new platform bypasses the old gatekeeper, or inflation eats the old equilibrium. The supposedly stable person discovers he had one pillar and called it a fortress. That is not stability. That is elegance hiding fragility. The new finish line is different. It is not one clean line at all. It is optionality. And optionality is messy. It may mean multiple income routes, transferable skills, assets that can generate cash independent of your immediate labor. A network that is not trapped inside one employer. A balance sheet that gives you the ability to move. A mind that can adapt a career path that is not one hallway with locked side doors. Most people resist optionality because it looks less tidy than stability. More moving parts, more ambiguity, more active management, more uncertainty. But in a moving world, optionality is often safer precisely because it spreads your survival across multiple possibilities. That is the update. The safest position is no longer perfect stillness. It is prepared mobility. And now let me tell you the hidden mechanism that connects all 8 broken rules. The old rules worked because the machine rewarded compliance. The new environment often rewards leverage. That is the deepest shift. You can still work hard, but it has to attach to scale. You can still learn, but you must keep updating. You can still save, but savings must serve protection and positioning. Not just idle waiting. You can still care about your craft, but demand comes first. You can still be patient, but patience must be combined with attempts. You can still seek stability, but only if it is supported by optionality underneath it. The world has shifted from one where good behavior inside a predictable machine compounded by default to one where good behavior without leverage often stalls. That is why so many responsible people feel betrayed. They followed the rules of a slower world inside a faster one. They acted like workers when the system increasingly rewards owners, distributors, allocators, and adaptive operators. This has psychological consequences too. People who do everything right under dead code become morally confused. They start wondering whether discipline is fake, whether education was a scam, whether work has no meaning, whether the world is just random. That reaction is understandable but incomplete. The better interpretation is this: the code changed, and you were never given the update. So here is the update: hard work without leverage is busy work. Loyalty without trajectory is underpriced risk. Education without continual adaptation is depreciating inventory. Patience without iteration is waiting in the wrong place. Savings without ownership are defensive, not transformative. Passion without demand is self-expression, not necessarily a business. Stability without optionality is a cage. Optionality is the new finish line because it reduces the number of ways one bad change can end your momentum. I want to take you one level deeper, because now we move from diagnosis to strategic consequence. If the old machine is gone, then your job is not to moralize about that fact. Your job is to build a new operating system. I call it the optionality stack. The optionality stack begins with one layer most people still underestimate: skill leverage. Not just any skill, a skill that is scarce enough, transferable enough, monetizable enough, or distribution friendly enough that it can move across industries, roles, or platforms. If your skill only matters inside one employer's internal process, you do not really own it. You are renting relevance. That is too dangerous. The second layer is ownership. Small ownership still counts. Equity index funds, business cash flow, revenue participation, royalties, assets that can earn when you are not physically present. Without ownership, you remain trapped in linear compensation forever. And linear compensation is a fragile game because your time remains the ceiling. The third layer is distribution. If nobody can find you, your skill does not travel well. If your value cannot leave the room you are physically in, then somebody else controls the door. Distribution can mean audience, network, reputation, platform fluency, deal flow, or simply being in the right circles where opportunities move first. Distribution is what keeps good work from dying in private. The fourth layer is liquidity, cash reserves, flexibility, the ability to absorb shocks and act when others freeze. I have said versions of this repeatedly because it is true repeatedly. A person with no liquidity has theory, not power. Liquidity turns optionality from an intellectual concept into a lived one. The fifth layer is iteration. You do not wait to be discovered. You test, you adapt, you gather signal. You try things small enough that failure teaches more than it damages. That is how adults navigate unscheduled systems, not with one giant bet, with intelligent repetition. Now notice what has happened. We are not talking about old school success anymore. We are talking about survival plus upside. That is the correct frame. The people who still treat modern life like a ladder are often the ones most shocked when the rung beneath them disappears. But people who treat it like a moving system build differently. They build redundancies, transferability, liquidity, ownership, relationships. Real skill distribution, that is what optionality actually looks like. In practice, it is not chaos, it is anti-fragility. It is the ability to remain in motion when one path closes. That is also why the old finish line of a stable job and a predictable future is so weak now. A stable job can still be valuable. I am not mocking steady income. I am mocking the idea that it is enough by itself. One paycheck with no optionality underneath it is comfort rented from the present. It can disappear faster than the mind wants to accept. This is why I keep returning to the same contrasts. Worker versus owner, linear versus scalable. Comfort versus independence, static versus adaptive, savings versus position savings, passion versus monetized demand, patience versus iteration, stability versus optionality. These are not slogans. They are directional corrections. And if you miss the correction, you can keep looking respectable while your structure quietly weakens year after year. That is the tragedy of dead code. It often produces good-looking decay. Now, let me make this very personal. If you feel behind, do not ask only, am I working hard enough? Ask, does this work scale beyond me? If you feel trapped, do not ask only, should I be more patient? Ask, Am I waiting inside a system that still pays waiting? If you feel undervalued, do not ask only, why am I not being rewarded for loyalty? Ask, what exactly am I loyal to? And is it compounding my leverage or shrinking it? If you feel educated but underpowered, do not ask only, was the degree worth it? Ask, what have I done since then to keep my value adaptive? If you feel disciplined but still distant from major assets, do not ask only, why is saving not enough? Ask, what is my ownership path? If you feel passionate but invisible, do not ask only, why am I not being discovered? Ask, where is the demand and do I have distribution? If you feel stable but strangely scared of disruption, do not ask only, why am I still anxious? Ask, do I actually have optionality, or am I simply dependent on one setup continuing forever? Those are adult questions. And adult questions tend to create adult outcomes. The modern world is not impossible. It is just less forgiving of passive obedience. That is what many people still fail to grasp. The old machine let you outsource a lot of thinking. Follow the path, stay clean, stay inside the lines. The reward would arrive. The new machine requires more active authorship. That is harder. It is also fairer in one strange way. It reveals structure faster. If your life is built on one brittle assumption, the environment will usually expose it. So the answer is not bitterness. The answer is redesign. Redesign your skill stack. Redesign your income map. Redesign your savings role. Redesign your relationship to patience. Redesign your concept of stability. Redesign your definition of success away from appearing settled and toward being able to keep moving under change. This is the point where some people become angry because they want a cleaner promise. They want to be told that hard work still guarantees progress, if only they remain noble enough. I cannot tell you that because it is not true. Hard work can still matter enormously, but now it matters most when it is attached to leverage, ownership, and adaptability. That is the update. Ignore it and the market will continue charging you for your nostalgia. I want to end where the whole thing really lives, not in the economy and identity. The hardest part of abandoning dead code is that it often feels like disloyalty to the version of yourself that was trained to believe in it. Maybe you were taught that being a good worker would be enough. Maybe you were praised for loyalty. Maybe education was treated like a sacred guarantee. Maybe patience was moralized. Maybe saving cash felt like obvious wisdom. Maybe following passion felt brave. Maybe stability felt like adulthood itself. Letting go of those assumptions can feel like betraying your upbringing. It is not betrayal, it is adaptation. And adaptation is what living systems do to survive. You are not required to hate the old rules. You are required to stop worshiping them after their incentive structure died. That is the whole thing. Old code is not evil. It is just dead. And dead code running inside a live life becomes expensive very quickly. So here is the final choice. Will you keep proving your virtue inside a machine that no longer pays virtue the same way? Or will you start building a life around the new finish line, leverage, ownership, adaptability, liquidity, and optionality? Because the game is already different. The schedule is already gone. The ladder is already unstable. The finish line already moved. And the longer you spend obeying a dead operating system, the more likely it is that your effort will keep buying you exhaustion instead of freedom. That is the real cost, not just being behind, but being behind for reasons you still call discipline. You can keep honoring the old code and hope the world changes back, or you can install the update. And once you install it, something uncomfortable but useful happens. You stop asking whether you are safe enough to wait. You start asking whether you are flexible enough to move. You stop asking whether the company will reward loyalty. You start asking whether your trajectory compounds with or without the company. You stop asking whether your degree should have guaranteed something. You start asking whether your skills still translate to the current market. You stop asking whether saving is enough. You start asking what your savings protect and what your capital owns. You stop asking whether passion deserves income. You start asking whether demand can carry what you build. You stop asking whether stability looks good from the outside. You start asking whether optionality gives you real control from the inside. That is the upgrade. And in this economy, upgrades are not optional, they are survival.